listening to Halfway There, episode number 184, April Diaz and Power and Justice in the Kingdom. Strong episode. Hey friends, welcome to Halfway There. This is the show where we have honest conversations with ordinary Christians about today's Christian experience. I'm your host, Eric Nevins. Thank you so much for being here. I am glad that you've downloaded, that you're listening, and I know that this conversation is going to be encouraging to you, so stick around. I hope that you enjoy it, and if you do me a favor, leave a review or a like out on in Apple iTunes or it's Apple Podcast now, or I'm actually on TikTok. I don't think I've told anybody that, so if you want to check me out on TikTok, you can do that as well. Our guest today, she's the founder and leader of Ezer Co, and she's a wife, a mom, an advocate, and a disruptor. So that means this conversation should be great. Our guest is April Diaz. April, welcome to Halfway There.
Thank you. Very happy to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
I'm glad to connect with you. So tell us a little bit about kind of you and where God has you right now.
At this moment, quite literally, I am sitting in my office. I live in Orange County, California, and sitting at my desk, the global headquarters, as I like to call it, of Ezer Co. A little bit more metaphorically speaking, I am a wife. I married my high school sweetheart. We've been together over 20 years, married almost 18. And we've got 3 kids, 11-year-old, a 9-year-old, and a 7-year-old. Those numbers are hard right now because they're all about to turn their new numbers, new ages. Yeah. So I'm always like, wait, how old are my kids? And our family is just unique and beautiful. We've wanted it to be kind of an only God kind of story. So we thought we would have biological kids first and then adopt. And that whole thing didn't happen the way that we anticipated. So went through years of really painful, horrific infertility treatment and ended up adopting our oldest 2 kiddos first from Ethiopia. And then pretty miraculously got pregnant 9 months later. And our littlest was born 7 weeks early. So we went from 0 to 3 kids in 15 months.
Whoa.
Yeah.
Didn't expect that.
We had a NICU baby, a 2-year-old and a 3-year-old. All 3 of them had varying degrees of trauma.
Wow.
So since becoming parents 9 years ago, our life has been bonkers. So you didn't really ask for all that story, but I gave it to you. Beyond that, a year ago, I started a new company called Ezer Co. And so I have self-appointed my title as founder and lead warrior of this company to activate women to live and lead with wholeness in full partnership with men. So that keeps me pretty good on a daily basis.
Yeah. What does that mean you do?
What does Ezer Co do?
Yeah.
So right now we provide coaching, one-on-one coaching, group coaching, and coaching certification for spiritual leaders. We do online courses and training. And I am hitting the road this year. I'm going to be speaking a lot all over the place, kind of telling our story as a company and what it is that we're about as an organization for women. So I'll be doing speaking and writing probably more this year than I've been doing in the last few years. So that's what we're up to right now. But honestly, I've got ridiculous dreams and vision and things that I want to see us do as a company, but that's where we're starting for now. Yeah. Oh, and I should also say, I also have a podcast. It's not directly connected to Ezer Co, but I have a podcast called The Global Fringe. And
nice.
That's a platform where we share stories, elevate voices of women and people of color who are leading in really beautiful ways around the world. So
awesome.
Yeah, that's what we're doing.
Yeah. And so I'll put a link to that in the show notes at halfwaytherepodcast.com, friends, so you can find it, or you can always, you're in the app, just go find the Global Fringe and subscribe. So you should totally do it.
Do it.
Okay, so let's hear some of your story. I'd love to go back and figure out how God brought you here. Hear some of that story. You gave us a really nice overview. I appreciate that. So it gives us an idea of where we're going. So where'd you grow up? Are you from California?
I'm not from California. I feel like it's in my bones. Like I was meant to live here my whole life. But I was born in Central Illinois, pretty much in a small farming community. My grandfather owned a bunch of land and was a farmer his whole life. And we lived in this tiny town in Central Illinois until I was 8 years old. And then my dad owned a landscaping business on a farm. And it did very well. He ran it with his brother and then felt called into ministry. And we were part of a church tradition that did not do that. Like that's not something that God did, was call people into ministry. So it was a pretty revolutionary thing for him to feel that calling and then to do something with it. So he sold his business and moved our family down to Dallas, Texas. And he went to seminary for 3.5 years, got his master's degree. So I was in Texas in my late elementary school years, which I think was really formative for me. And then we moved back to Central Illinois for a year while my dad tried to figure out where does he go from here and looked for pastoral jobs. Ended up moving to Fort Wayne, Indiana when I was in 8th grade. And he started a church. And so I did 8th grade and then high school in Indiana, graduated high school and moved to Chicago and started full-time vocational ministry at 18 years old. So I lived in multiple places growing up. And actually one of the funniest weird parts of the story that also feels really formative was did Christian school and then was homeschooled when I lived in Texas. And then when we moved to Central Illinois again, I went to a public school for the very first time. So 6th grade, I was homeschooled, lived in Texas. 7th grade, went to public school for the first time in Illinois. 8th grade, went to another public middle school in Indiana. So middle school was a hot mess for me. And I think has shaped a lot of my world.
Well, that's interesting. Okay. How so?
Well, first, one thing was I was a middle school pastor for a lot of years. And I think that I was drawn into youth ministry and fell in love with middle school students because I got how crazy it is, how much you can feel like you don't belong and you feel like out of your own skin and fish out of water. But I think it was very formative for me to have experiences as a kid that were really different, to be homeschooled, Christian school, public school, the whole gamut, right? Like that was important. To have lived in 3 different states and in very different cultural climates.
Sure.
Very small town, then a large metropolis city, and then in a kind of a medium-sized Midwestern town. That all was really significant. We moved to Texas when I was in 4th grade. And what I have since learned about the significance of that 4th grade year, it both sets your 4th grade, 10 years old, kind of sets your comfortability levels and opens up your imagination for what is possible. And so how a 4th grader experiences that year really does set a trajectory for adulthood. So that was the year I moved to Texas. Yeah. And I think that I've always said, even before I knew the significance of 4th grade, I've always said living in Dallas ruined me for the big city.
That's interesting.
I was a small town farming girl, and now I live in Orange County, California, and it feels like home to me. And I think that I can be traced back to that.
Yeah, interesting. Okay, so obviously a Christian family. If your dad was pursuing ministry, how did that become your own? Did you have some significant mentors or a moment or not?
Yeah, I think the interesting backstory with that is because of the faith tradition that I had grown up in, God did not call women into ministry. God didn't even call men into ministry, right? That was a new thing for my dad. But then even more so, that's not what God did for women. Women's place was in the home and to get married, have babies, take care of house. And so I had no imagination for what could be for me in a vocational leadership ministry calling. So I just had never thought about it. when I was 16 years old, I had been leading in campus life in my local high school. And I was one of the 7 leaders that our campus life leader called out and asked if I would be a part of this core team to help him, lead that campus life chapter in our school. And my husband is actually a part of that team as well. And it was like the first time I'd had any sort of formal leadership. So Brad Johnson saw something in me and called that out in me without even exactly calling it out. He just invited me into participating. But then when I was a junior in high school, I went to a conference, and it was for youth ministry. It was for youth workers. And I got to go kind of last minute, weird, random story, but I was sitting in the audience and I really clearly heard God say, "This is what I've marked your life for." And I knew exactly what it meant.
Wow.
Even though I never could have imagined that would have happened. So I came home and I was like, I'm supposed to go into youth ministry. I'm supposed to be a youth pastor. And no framework, no models, no mentors, no history, where I could have seen that. But I started pursuing that, and my parents had enough, I think, maturity and obedience factor to go okay, there's something to this, and we're gonna let her do it. So they did.
Wow, cool. Okay, so that was kind of significant in sending you in a leadership direction, and kind of, it sounds like maybe it opened up your ideas of what maybe was possible for you as a woman.
For sure.
Yeah,
for sure.
Interesting. That is such a, as you probably know, it's such an interesting world, right? Such an interesting, the kinds of things that we allow people to imagine themselves doing matters a great deal.
It does.
Yeah. Okay. So it sounds like that was kind of how your faith started to develop. Did you, so as you were leading, how did that impact your relationship with God during those seasons? What was that like?
Oh, that's a good question. I had been a Christian. I had asked Jesus in my heart when I was 5. Faith had always been a part of my story and a part of my family's experience. So I didn't know what life would look like apart from that. And I think that serving, leadership, ministry made sense as just like a natural weave into my own faith. And that was just an expression of what was happening for me internally. But I think, I started full-time ministry at 18 years old. So at 18, you're still figuring out who you are,
right?
What you're supposed to do in the world, who it is that you want to be. All of that is still very forming. And so I think that the gift of starting so young in ministry was at that point, I did have a number of people who started walking alongside of me to help build character, to help me pay attention to my soul, to align me to what was beyond what I did, but to root me into who it is that I was, and have the things that I did be an outcome of that. So that's a gift. I feel that that was an unfair advantage for me.
Yeah.
Because I didn't, I wouldn't have known to do that on my own, and I certainly am the kind of person that I just would have run really hard after achievements and goals and, popularity and fame, all that stuff that can really junk you up. That's the pathway I would have naturally gone on.
Yeah.
But the people that were around me, I think, helped to weight me in. And at that point too, I was dating my husband. We're high school sweethearts. So we were dating, when I started full-time ministry. We actually broke up for a while in that period, but he has always been somebody who has not cared at all what I do, is just more concerned about who I am and loves me for that. And so in a lot of ways, he just doesn't care and has never cared about what podcasts I'm on or what stages I speak on or who invites me to go, to be on staff at a place. That doesn't matter to him. Who I am has always mattered. So I think that those people have always been a weight for me of what matters most.
Yeah. So what's one lesson that you learned from those people that really shaped you and changed you for the better?
Dramatic pause. There's a lot.
Those are good.
The thing that comes to mind is I was in my mid-20s. I'd been doing full-time ministry for probably 5 or 6 years. And my husband and I were thinking about moving on from the church that we were working at. And we weren't thinking about it. We were planning on it. We just had no idea what we were going to do next. And so we had this very kind of Abraham experience where God said, I'll go to the land, I'll show you. And we're like, cool, that sounds awesome. Good things happen for Abraham. That'll probably be a good thing for us.
That's really trusting. Wait. You got to tell me that story. So tell me that story.
So we'd both been on staff at a church in Chicago for a number of years. We'd been married about 3 years at that point. And there was enough that was like just felt disruptive in our souls about what it is that we wanted to contribute to. And that was not compatible with the church that we were working at. And that gap kind of kept growing for us. So there were a number of things that we were like, we want to be a part of a church that's X, Y, and Z. We want to contribute to a place that looks like this. And we didn't know if a place like that existed. We just knew we couldn't stay where we were at. And we were like in a worship service kind of together and very much had this sense of God say, go to the land, I'll show you, which meant what we heard was like, you need to quit your job. And I will reveal to you where it is that you're to go next. But that's the first step of that faith thing for you, is to let go of what you're holding on as important and trust that I'm going to give you the next thing.
And you both heard that?
We did. Yeah. I mean, I don't know actually who heard it first, but we were both in agreement with each other. And so we told our bosses, like, we're quitting, we're done at some point, but we don't know what's next. They were gracious enough to say, it's cool, stay on board until you figure it out. But a couple months went by and we still had no idea what we were supposed to do. So I ended up having 2 panic attacks in the span of about 2 or 3 weeks. And I'm not by nature an anxious person, so they really scared me. Panic attacks are horrifying in general.
Yeah.
But I had no framework for anxiety either. And so going back to your question of like one of the greatest lessons, I had a conversation with my spiritual director. Her name is Mindy. And she had been walking with us through this transition and trying to figure out what the heck was going on for us. And she said to me, April, you have a really strong Popeye arm. And I was like, what do you mean? And she said, you got this, Popeye, he's got this really strong bicep, like this disproportionate large bicep muscle.
Oh, wow.
She said, but that muscle for you is work. It is getting stuff done, accomplishing goals, achieving things, you can get a lot of stuff done. But she said, you have another arm that's incredibly emaciated. It's not proportionate. And that muscle is called rest. And unless you figure out how to learn the unforced rhythms of grace, you're going to be in trouble. And I was like, okay, great, cool. So what else you got? It was a slow learner, Eric. And I think that she actually gave me that illustration in between those panic attacks. So I had another one after that. And then she started walking me through what does it look like to be a person who runs hard and fast and accomplishes a lot of stuff and learns the unforced rhythms of grace and learns how to take a real rest. So I think that has been one of the greatest game changers for me, and has allowed me to stay in this gig for 20 plus years, is to learn what it looks like to rest. And I'm still not like a pro at this. It is still hard for me. Last night at 7:00, my husband came into my little office here and goes, do you know what time it is? And I said, nope. And I looked at my clock and I was like, it's 7:00. And he's like, you should probably get off. Dinner, children, bedtime, like join me.
Yeah. So,
I'm a work in progress.
Yeah, that's good. But you had a spiritual director. That's really interesting. Did you, how'd that come about? Because that's not, unless your tradition was like that, that's not necessarily common.
No, I was at a mega church. And before that, I was at a very conservative fundamentalist church. So I had no context for it. She oversaw spiritual formation at our church, and she'd been trained in spiritual direction and had her own kind of bottoming out in her life. And she had 3 small kids at the time. And so I I actually met her through my husband. He had been doing kind of a spiritual formation group with his work buddies. So she was leading this as a part of her job with this group of people that my husband's team was on. And then I met her and I was like, she's amazing. I kind of want to steal her. So that's kind of our joke, because I've stolen Mindy from Brian, but that's not entirely true. She has been a part of every significant decision we have made as a couple.
Wow.
Since the early 2000s. Like, there literally hasn't been anything that has been significant or meaningful or important to us that we haven't run through her, because she is such a voice of wisdom. And, I don't have like monthly direction meetings, conversations with her. But she is just consistently somebody that I go back to when, something feels off in my soul, or I'm needing to make a decision, or I'm hitting some sort of like spiritual barrier and I'm not quite sure what that breakthrough looks like. She has just been a gift. And again, like, just kind of an unfair advantage. I didn't totally go out searching for her.
Yeah.
She was there and I took advantage.
And you were like, okay, that's great.
Mm-hmm.
Interesting. I'm a little surprised that you didn't, at least, well, maybe you did. So tell me, but being such an achiever and hearing you need to rest. Like, sometimes achievers will take rest and they'll like make it work.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And they'll be like, okay, I'm going to develop that other arm now. And I'm just going to,
start those reps.
Yeah. Right. Interesting.
No, she had to teach me how to do that, because certainly that would have been my thing. I would have been like, great, now what are the 10 things I'm going to do on my Sabbath?
Exactly.
That will be accomplishing rest.
10 ways to Sabbath. Oh my gosh.
Totally. She certainly had to teach me, because that is not, all of this stuff is not my natural bent.
Yeah. Yeah, that's perfect. Okay. So where did you go from there? So obviously that led you somewhere. You heard God say, go where I'm going to show you. What did that lead to?
So we ended up moving to California in 2004, and I took a junior high pastor position at a predominantly Asian American church, but it was very multi-ethnic. I was the first white person they hired. I was only the second female pastor that they had hired. The first one was there for less than a year. So I was the only female pastor for a long time, and I was the youngest pastor that they had ever hired. So I was kind of like this 3 strikes and I was out trifecta of odd girl. But yeah, I took that position and we moved out here. We were in our mid-20s, and I worked at that church for almost 10 years. I had 5 different roles in 10 years, and just grew a ton. It was quite a ride.
Did you experience any of the burnout that comes with ministry? A lot of people experience that spiritually.
No.
Interesting. What was it like?
Yeah, I mean, in some ways I want to say yes, because I want to identify with people and be like, I get it.
Well, some people do, and maybe some people don't. Your experience could be different. That's all right.
Yeah, totally. I don't want to lie and present a false story, but no. And it really does. It goes back to these voices, these people that helped to root me and could see. I mean, I certainly think I was proactive. I have been very proactive in asking people, what do you see? What are you noticing? How am I doing? I'm having a problem. I have been fairly good at that in my life. So I'm not going to, I'll take some responsibility for that. And I will say there's been people like Mindy and Nancy and Jeannie and Dave and Hendry and my therapist that all along the way, I've been really like intentional to ask these other voices to speak into my life and leadership and to make sure that I don't go off the rails. So I will say that I think that the number one practice that I have had that has been crucial for my wholeness or my pursuit of that has been a monthly day of silence and solitude. Mm-hmm. I have done that for almost 15 years, the first Monday of every month, with the exception of about 3 to 4 years in the middle of that when my kids were really young and we were in like straight up survival mode.
Yeah.
And I still think I probably could have found a way to make that happen, but I didn't. And so, for over a decade though, that has been a really grounding praxis. And I think that has saved me from the burnout. Mindy, another like kind of text passage that she has used in my life pretty profoundly is, we've spent a lot of time talking about like, what's the benefit if you gain the whole world and you lose your soul? And being married to the man that I am, and then having the people around me other people that I've had around me that that passage has just been really important, that like, it's just not worth it. It's not worth it for me to lose my marriage or my kids or the work that I love to do. If it's going to kill me, I want to be in this for the long haul. So I haven't experienced that amount of burnout. I have experienced some lows and some periods of like running too hard, too long, but not the kind of burnout that lots of people do experience.
Yeah, that's good. So have you ever had like a dark night of the soul, or a time when God felt like he was far away?
Oh yeah. Lots of them, several of them actually.
Okay.
Which one do you want to hear about?
It's up to you.
Oh man. I'll give you the most recent one. I've had a few for sure. And all of them have been in my adult years. All of them have been kind of at points where like the foundation of how I viewed faith and God and my relationship in that was being like altered. Like there was a seismic shift that was happening.
Yeah.
So I would say the most recent one was about 3 years ago. And we had moved to Northern Indiana for ultimately to be closer to extended family. But we also moved because my husband got a job that presented kind of a new career path opportunity for him. So we moved in July of 2015. And we lived there exactly 2 years, like literally to the day. It was kind of creepy.
Wow.
Didn't plan that, but to the day. And those 2 years were a dark night of the soul. The job that my husband took, within 6 months, he ended up quitting because it was horrific. It was killing him. He had 2 panic attacks as well in the span of about 4 or 5 weeks. But yeah, the promise of what that was just bottomed out. The family that we had moved close to be with, a lot of kind of both unmet expectations, but also just shifts and like understanding like we're in a different place than our family was, and we're different people.
Like spiritually, do you mean?
Definitely spiritually, value-wise, the way that we think about the world and our place in it. You know, we'd been living 2,000 plus miles away from them for over a decade. And then we kind of come back home, air quote.
Yeah. And
we were really different, and they were probably different as well, but we just had kind of gone 2 different directions. And then, you know, we don't need to go into this if you don't want to, but like it was a really interesting political climate at that point.
Sure.
And our family is a very multi-ethnic, darker colored family for the most part. And we were living in a place that was pretty conservative and pretty unaware of like racial realities that were happening.
Yeah.
So like the KKK was active about 10 miles from our house, and we have 2 Black children. So there was a lot of stuff going on. We were just pretty miserable. We had this gorgeous house that we owned, beautiful property. You know, there was a lot that like on a surface, at least financial level, looked really good. But we were dying inside. And the things that I thought the church was supposed to be and do in this world felt very different from what we were experiencing. The church that we were a part of for those couple of years was good in some ways. And it was also actually felt re-traumatizing for us and others. And so we just felt really alone and really unknown. And like we had just made this massive mistake moving 2,000 miles away from a lot of what we knew and loved and was important to us. And so those 2 years, yeah, it really shifted some things and clarified what it is that we wanted to be about in our life.
Yeah. Where was God during all that?
It's interesting because like the different dark nights of the soul, I have felt God differently. I actually felt in that season like God was really close. That God like wept with us. That there was a sadness around the distance between what we felt like the church particularly was supposed to be and do, and what our experience with what the church was. So God felt, I felt like God was very tender and very close and very just mourned and lamented with us. But it didn't feel like, God certainly didn't feel like fun and adventurous and like, like those happier parts that I enjoy about who God is. You know what I mean?
I do. Yeah. It sounds like it was really isolating relationally. And as a result, God was closer maybe.
I think that's fair.
Was he, because a lot of times the Dark Knight, he'll use that to take something out of you, right? To take, John of the Cross has that image of like gold, right? You refine gold and kind of the things. What do you think he was doing in that season for you?
Yeah, I mean, I think Brian's my husband. I haven't said his name. I've just referred to him, I realized. Brian and I think, got really clear on what it is that we wanted for our family. The kind of culture, the kind of environment, the kind of values that we wanted to build our family with. And, sometimes when like you're a fish in water, you don't realize you're in water. You're just swimming. And we felt so fish out of water for those 2 years that we just had a lot of clarifying conversations of, no, this is who we want to be. This is the kind of family that we want to raise. This is the opportunities that we want for our kids. This is the kind of commitments we want to make. So that was really valuable to figure out, like, we're fish. We belong in this kind of water. Otherwise, we will die.
Yeah, right.
But I also think, like, work-wise, for me, there was a lot of clarification around what is it that I actually want to contribute to and build and invest in. And at that point, I was contributing to other people's visions that started to feel more and more misaligned with my own values and with my own vision.
Yeah.
And so I think that was significant. I think the third piece was we started really seeing like the racial disparity and the systemic injustices of our country. When we were living in a very strongly, predominantly white community with my husband's Hispanic. We've got 2 Ethiopian kids, and then our biological son is mixed, obviously. And I know what it's like to be a white girl just living in a majority. That was most of my growing up years. But most of my adult years, I have been a minority, and I've come to like that feels normal to me now. But it also has taught me a lot about like systemic injustice and oppression and privilege and racial disparity and all of that kind of stuff. And so I think living in a place where that felt so stark and bold and like in my face, it gave us some language and some deeper commitment to be first a family, but then for me to be a leader that speaks to this, that contributes towards progress and isn't silent or complicit to the injustices.
Nice.
So there were some good things that happened there.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's interesting. So, Jody and I both grew up in Iowa, my wife.
Yep.
And we visited for Christmas, and I've never felt so out of place in Iowa.
Yeah.
Iowa is a very white place, and it's a great place. I love my family, but I'm starting to realize we've been gone a while, and so we're kind of outgrown some of the things that we used to believe.
Yeah.
And
same.
That's true in a lot of places, if you leave. So it is interesting. And I don't know, we could go into all those kinds of things. I think the hardest part is if you don't see the problems with racial injustice that still are, we're recording this a couple days after MLK Day, right? So if you don't even see them, it's really hard to even pay attention, right? Because it's in states like that, it's just not something that they have to deal with, even though.
Yeah, I actually just read, I mean, I'm always learning, right? Because as a white woman in our country, I carry a lot of inherent privilege. And one of the things that I was reading on Monday is that if you don't even see the injustice, if there's not a hunger to have those injustices made right, what that is an indicator of is how full of your privilege you actually are.
Yeah.
And it's kind of like once you pull back the curtain and you see it, it's like you can't not see it anymore.
Yep.
And so that has been true of me. And, Brian was like the first entry point in me getting that and seeing that, because he grew up as a brown-skinned boy in a predominantly white spaces, and, parents spoke another language and ate different foods and all kinds of things that I just had no context for. But I've been on a really intense journey in the last 20 years now to uncover what's my privilege and how do I use that for the sake of others and use that in a way that will bring some justice.
Yeah. Yeah. So I was going to ask the question, like, what does that teach you about God?
So if your listeners are into the Enneagram, I'm an Enneagram 8 with a 7 wing. So what that means in my everyday life is like, I love challenging things. Like I am all about like burning down all of the stuff that hurts people. And I want to rebuild things that are for all of us. And that will benefit all of us, not just those with the power. And I have a really fun side too. And I love ideas and I like creating stuff, and I can be wild like that. So I think that it has shown me those parts about who God is as well. That God is powerful and desires for there to be justice for all. And, but the part that has surprised me in the last few years is the lament that is required. And so I think that it's taught me a lot about how much God laments for all that is not right in the world. And again, that's not my natural bent. I would rather be angry than sad. I'd rather burn stuff down than build stuff some days. But this has been a real practice for me in grieving and of feeling just deep sadness for all that is not right, and how that has harmed so many people in our country for centuries, and how it continues to, even at the hands of the church. And so I think that has been that's been a real good tethering for me to understand a part about God that doesn't come as naturally for me.
Yeah. Wow. Absolutely. I want to still talk about Ezer Co. So tell us about kind of what you're doing there.
Well, if you would have told me 2 years ago that this was what I would do, I would have said you're crazy. This is not a part of my plan. This is not a part of my leadership trajectory or ministry. But I have been a woman in leadership for over 20 years, and I have been able to lead at 2 incredibly influential, affirming churches of women and of their value and contribution to the church based on gifts, not just on gender. And yet I have always been one of the minorities around the table gender-wise. Sometimes I've been the only female in the room. There's still such a disparity between women leading in full partnership with men in all spaces. And so, first of all, I had to go on a pretty significant theological journey, because my background certainly did not say that this was blessed by God for me to do what I'm doing. Some would say I am sinning.
Was that difficult?
It was.
Yeah.
Yeah. There was a lot of dissonance because it's the system you've grown up in. So to buck that system and reframe what has been said to be true and what it is that you should be doing. Yeah, there's some loss in that to what it is that you've believed, and also in some relationships, right?
Yeah.
But like when you have a sense and a calling from God that is in disagreement to what you've been taught, my choice was to look at, well, what does God actually say then, not those other voices. So I went on a big theological journey, which, led me into me continuing to do all the things that I'm doing. But that's why Ezer Co exists now, is there is still such a disparity between women leading and teaching alongside of men in all spaces, in boardrooms, in pulpits, in homes, in our political sectors. There's just a minority of us in all of those spaces, and so much injustice. I mean, if you look even on a global level, right, with the amount of abuse and trafficking and economic disparity, women lose all the time. And so because I think that that's always been my desire to see more justice come in the world and to challenge those things that are unfair and unequal, there is nothing more personal to me than like my gender, my womanhood.
Sure.
And now I have a daughter and 2 sons that I want the world to be different for. So this whole thing just birthed out of the essence of who I am. I actually have Ezer tattooed on my arm.
Oh, wow. Cool.
And I've got the Hebrew word Ezer, but then I've also got the English translation for it. I got that tattooed on my arm about 5 or 6 years ago when I learned what that word actually meant and what it looks like for women to be who it is that we've been created to be. So now we're going to do all the things to awaken women and activate them and help men partner better with us so that we can see more of the kingdom come. I think some of the reason we don't see more good things come on earth as it is in heaven is because of the ways that we have squashed and silenced women to not see that come.
Yeah, it's kind of tough to do when you're squashing half your population, right? Or better. What? Maybe you said it and I missed it, but what does Ezer mean?
Okay, yeah, I did not say that.
Okay, good.
I felt like I was talking for way too long.
I was feeling like a bad podcast host, but that's good. I was like, did I miss that?
I'm just talking too much, so I thought I would pause.
No, it's all about your story.
Okay, so the word Ezer, it's a Hebrew word. It's used 21 times in the Old Testament of the Bible, and twice it's used to describe woman when God forms her out of the side of man in Genesis 2. And our translations often translate Ezer as I will make a helper who is suitable for him. So it's, I will make an Ezer that is suitable for him. So Ezer is sometimes translated as helper or helpmate or helpmeet. That word has been used to really place women in subordinate, secondary, lesser than positions. Like, yeah, you help the man do all of his things. Even though in Genesis 1 and 2, when God creates man and woman, God gives them both 4 mandates to make and reign and fill and multiply the earth. All 4 mandates were given to both man and women. So there's one piece of it. But in those 21 times that Ezer is used in the Old Testament, twice it's used to describe the woman, but 16 times it's that word Ezer is used to describe God. And so that word has been horribly translated and then placed on women as something that is less than, because there is no way that God is less than,
right,
or secondary or subordinate or just helping us in our life. God is much more than that. So it can be translated as helper, but it's also translated elsewhere in the Old Testament as rescuer, as a strong helper, or as a warrior. So I want women to be warriors.
Oh, interesting. Wow. Okay. So this, as a Bible nerd, so I have a degree in biblical studies, and like that just proves, right, the importance of doing your own study. You know, so often, friends, even you always read out of more than one translation, because even the ones that you've got they're created.
They've got bias.
They're biased. I'm trying to say it nice, but they're translated by people who have their own theological views, and so they definitely are putting things there that they believe. So interesting, but that's fascinating that that same word is used of God.
16 out of the 21 times.
So more.
Ezer is used to describe God. Yeah.
So you can't use that of women and say no, and say that's great.
No, we have missed it. We have really missed it. So her name came really easily to me because I want to reclaim what it is that women have actually been created in the beginning. I say all the time, your whole story matters. I believe that to be true for your life and my life, but I also believe that's true for like humanity. And if our whole story matters, we need to go back to the beginning and what was actually formed in the very beginning of who woman has been created to be. And it's not just the importance of what an Ezer is, like that I am a warrior, I am a strong helper, I am a rescuer, but also that we are to do it in the company of one another. It's me plus others, and that's other Ezers, but that's also men. So this partnership piece is also what has been designed from the beginning. Man and woman were to be in partnership with each other. This word Ezer actually has little to nothing to do with marriage. It has mostly to do with relationship and with identity. And so I want to reclaim that word in a biblical sense, but it's broader than that because every woman has been created as an Ezer, regardless of whether or not she believes in God, whether or not she has a relationship with Jesus. So it transcends that. And we are to do that in the company of one another because that's how we've also been created, is to do life together.
Amen. Isn't that interesting also how powerful it is to create partnerships instead of just marriages, right? Like marriage is a partnership of sorts, but when you have someone when you walk together, it's a whole different deal than, some of the things I've certainly was brought up to believe.
Yeah. So I did an episode this last season with a friend of mine. His name is Mike Park, and we used to work together. I hired him. He reported to me. So there was a power structure there, but there was also, we established a really strong friendship. And so I had him on my podcast to talk about, can men and women really be friends? And we talked about like, what does partnership look like in friendship with one another? And I love that episode because it's just he and I talking about what friendship looks like for us. But later on this fall, I was doing some reading, and Tremper Longman talks about what does it look like for men and to be allies to women. And that's what we call the men that are in partnership with us at Ezer Co. is the women are Ezers and men are allies, and we need to be in relationship with each other.
Gotcha. But
Tremper Longman translates ally, and he describes it as thinking about men and women standing back to back against the wilds of chaos as God's image bearers who bring goodness and order to his name. And I love that so much too, because that doesn't mean it's just marriage relationships. Like it looks like, what does it look like for you and I to stand back to back to one another, with one another, against the wilds of chaos as the individual image bearers and that God has given to us. So there's a lot more to that.
I love that. Trevor Longman's good too. So that's
good name drop there.
Yeah. Oh man, he's amazing. He's guys, for Old Testament scholars, you can't go wrong. He's really good. Anyway, well, that's awesome. So I love that. So what does that mean you do? You do coaching and you do speaking and you guys are having an event where you bring people out and you have a whole thing.
Yep. Yeah. So the coaching piece is really where we're getting started. I was certified in coaching about 7 years ago. And I love coaching because it helps people to see results in their life much quicker than they would without that process, without that structure and that accountability. So I do one-on-one coaching, but we've got a team of people that are starting this year to do coaching for us to broaden our one-on-one coaching. We've got coaching groups groups of women that come together for a 6-month journey. And that whole process is designed around how do we lead ourselves to our whole self? Because self-leadership is kind of what makes or breaks our ability to stay leading, to stay in the game for the long haul. And then we train coaches in partnership with a globally recognized training organization, because I want to see more spiritual leaders know what it looks like to use the art and the science that we have available to us to see transformation take place in people's lives. So that's, people who are certainly pastors, but also nonprofit leaders and teachers and podcasters and folks that are in all kinds of jobs, business owners, people that do all kinds of work, but see their work as spiritual, and they want to see change happen with the people that they are influencing. So
Wow.
I feel like that coaching piece is the strongest aspect of what we're doing, but certainly we'll be doing retreats and training and online courses and all that kind of stuff as we grow and develop.
Oh, I love that. I wanted to mention it at least so that if our friends are listening, if you're listening, you want to hear more, you want to join in. So you can do that. It's Ezer Co. That's EZERandCo.com. And that'll be in the show notes at halfwaytherepodcast.com as well. So it's easy to do it. Or if you just look in your app, they're all right there. Just click the link. Go check it out. Okay. Well, April, I appreciate you being here. I appreciate the conversation and sharing a little bit of your story. I love what you're doing. You are bringing the kingdom of God that is already more to fruition. And I think that's great. Thanks a lot.
Thanks, Brian. I appreciate you having me.